Hello and a very warm welcome to the program from me, David Foster. Work hard in class and success is attainable for anybody, right? Well, not in America, where you're almost twice as likely to drop out of high school if you're black rather than white. Are life chances stacked against young black people from the very beginning? So, now, as part of our series of programs examining the deeper issues behind Black Lives Matter, we'll be looking at whether black communities are right to complain that they don't get the same chance of a decent education.
Following George Floyd's death at the hands of police officers in Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter protests have taken place all around the world. College students and school pupils are among those raising their voices and standing against forms of injustice, including in their educational institutions. Campaigners say there is an education gap in America. According to non-profit Ed Build, school districts that predominantly serve students of color received $23 billion less in funding than most white school districts in the US in 2016, despite serving the same number of students. And 21% of black students drop out from high school compared to 11% of white students, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Sometimes even high-performing students from low-income backgrounds are less likely to graduate from college than their peers from more privileged backgrounds, and the disparity is seen in other countries too. A study found that 10.3% of black students in England leave university early, compared with 6.9% for the student population as a whole. In the wake of George Floyd's death, many schools and universities are promising to do better for black students. But will anything change?
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can welcome from Los Angeles Marshe Doss, college student activist who campaigned to get police to stop random searches of students in the LA public school system. We say hello to Jessie Hagopian, teacher of ethnic studies in Seattle in the US, and Brenda King joins us from London, chief exec of ACDiversity, which runs mentoring schemes for black and ethnic minority high school pupils in the UK. Jessie, to you first of all, if I may, you say that there is more segregation now in American schools than at any time since 1968 when the civil rights laws came in. That surprises me.
That's right. Yes, our schools have gone into reverse in terms of the levels of segregation here in the United States. I started my teaching career in Washington, D.C., teaching in elementary school. And that school was across the Anacostia River in Southeast. And I would drive by the White House. And then when I crossed the river, I was in a school that was completely segregated, 100% black students, and a school that was just crumbling. We know that the segregation comes with lack of resources, and that the first assignment I ever gave my students, the first research project, was to go create a poster about someone they admired from history who had helped to create social change. The students turned that project into me on my first month of teaching, and we weren't able to grade it because we came in the school, we came in the classroom, and there was standing water all over the floor. The posters had been destroyed by rainwater that had come through a hole in the ceiling. And I had to wheel an industrial-sized garbage can under that hole for the entire 3 years of my teaching career there. The hole was never fixed. And to me, that's
I'm
just a
sorry
metaphor.
to interrupt. I know Anacostia. It is a very deprived part of the city, but I'm really trying to get at why you think it's worse now than at any time in the last 50 plus years.
Well, the studies have shown that our schools have resegregated, and black and brown students are concentrated in school buildings, and white students are not attending those schools. And I think it has to do with several factors. I mean, we have to look at how schools are funded in the United States by property taxes, so that in poor areas, largely black and brown areas, the schools receive far less funds than the wealthier white districts. And so white families aren't going to send their children to those areas. I think another major factor in the creation of these segregated schools is the high stakes testing regime that we use here to rank and sort students into segregated schools and segregated programs, so that even in buildings where there is some level of racial integration in the school, when you go class by class, you see that within that integrated school, the classrooms are segregated by the quote advanced students and the general ed students based on test scores.
Okay, I want to go to Marshe in just a moment, but let me just read out to back up what you've just been saying. Nationally, white students are 1.8 times as likely as black students to be in a gifted and talented program. And across the country, non-white school districts get $23 billion less than predominantly white districts. Works out at over £2,000 per student. Marshe, tell me about your school in Los Angeles. I assume you're only a year out of there. Does what Jesse say resonate with you?
Yeah, it actually does. At my school, there's a lot of students that I known that I've graduated with who didn't go to my school. They would rather bus out because they felt like it was a better school, that they would learn more, they would have more access to things, and that's the truth because the school that I went to was definitely underfunded, could barely keep our rooms stocked with enough chairs, our bathrooms stocked with soap, toilet tissue. I feel like overall it was neglected compared to other schools in fancier neighborhoods in LA, in Beverly Hills, Calabasas. They're still part of LAUSD's district, but their school is somehow better than our school due to the divide of low income and high income.
And I'll ask you about your fellow pupils in just a moment, but let me read this out. This is from Brookings, a major respected international institution, but from 1998 in a report called Unequal Opportunity, Race and Education. And this is what they put down. The presumption that guides much of the conversation is that equal opportunity now exists. Therefore, continued low levels of achievement on the part of minority students must be a function of genes, culture, or a lack of effort and will. Marsha, do you think much has changed in the intervening 22 years?
Um,
But
I
people
want to
put it down to laziness, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's not true. I don't feel like it's because people are lazy or it's up to their genes or they weren't taught or didn't have discipline. I feel like it's entirely based on the educational system. For one, at a school that has predominantly black and brown students, not to see a teacher that is black and brown often reflects the relationship and the way that white teachers teach black students. It isn't the same. Um, so we definitely need more black teachers in order to sustain our I feel like our black mind and the way that we think. They understand the problems that we go through and the lifestyle that we live. I know a lot of students who just it's just hard. It's hard. Life is hard, and it is extremely hard for a black student outside of school, and then it's 10 times harder inside of school, especially when you don't have the resources that you need, when your books are falling apart, when your teacher doesn't understand what's going on with you and they can't teach you the correct way. There's multitude of things that play into it. It's not laziness, it's not based up to genes, it's our educational system that's falling apart.
I want to come
Yes.
back to both you and Jesse in just a moment and ask why things improved slightly under President Obama, then tailed off, and why they've now improved slightly, but not at a great rate under President Trump. I'll come back to that, but I want to go to Brenda and bring up a point that Marshe made, that there aren't enough black teachers. And one of the things I know you've pointed out that of the 17,000, I think, university professors in the UK, only 17 are black women. What's happening here?
I want to thank Marsha for bringing up that point, because research coming out of the US shows how important, representation matters. It matters if you're female, it matters if you are a Black person, it just matters. And the point, in fact, is there are insufficient Black teachers. And those Black teachers that are there, research shows they tend to be lower paid, they tend to be more likely to be disciplined for some transgression. So those who are there, it is very difficult being there, but the point is they're insufficient there in the first place.
And is it because of pay and conditions, or is there something more fundamental here?
I think they're not doing enough to recruit Black teachers. And then when they do recruit Black teachers, they make it difficult for them to progress within their career. So there's an issue, there are two issues. One of being recruitment, the other one is retainment.
Okay, let me ask you about one of the things that I assume if there are a scarcity, there aren't many Black teachers either at school or university, then they wouldn't be putting their own personal interpretation on some lessons. So you are calling for the decolonization of the curriculum. What does that mean?
I think you read a research just now to Marshe about the fact that there is people believe incorrectly, very incorrectly, that we are lazy. People don't look at the fact that there are lack of resources. The other factor that we have to deal with is that when there is a research, the perspective is a very European perspective. I think there's an African saying that in terms of when you're dealing with a hunter and the lion, the hunter always looks better because they are the one writing the narrative from their perspective. So the same thing here. So when a number of our students complain during Black History Month, there is an over focus of the 200 years of slavery, as if that solely defines Black history. They don't go back the 7,000 years to look at African civilization. And I myself, when I was within an EU institution, used to have discussions with people who did not think that Egypt was in Africa, when you simply had to look at a map. And that's because you know, when you talk about the pyramids, or if you talk about civilization, they think of Egypt, and because they think positively of Egypt from a historical viewpoint, some people think, well, oh, it cannot be in Africa. So this is what they mean, that we need a much broader perspective. And we've seen some of that play out with the Black Lives Matter events that are happening.
Brenda, I'll come back and try and get some of your answers to this, but I want to go back to Jessie at this point. Jessie, under President Obama, the number of school dropouts who were Black pupils decreased. Under President Trump, again, it's relatively low compared to 25 years ago, but it is still almost twice as high as that of white pupils. What do you think is the reason for that? Why is there a lack of funding? Why is there a lack of concentration on the problems?
Well, I think that our nation has a long history of perpetuating institutional racism in education and beyond. And I just want to reference your earlier comment about that argument that it somehow relates to lack of will or something wrong with the genes of Black students for not achieving in our school system. And I would argue, in fact, that maybe no group ever has worked harder to achieve in education than Black people. Starting.
Can I just correct something here? It wasn't that they were saying that this is the case. They were saying that there is a presumption that is the case, that some people assume that if equality exists, therefore there must be another reason, and that might be laziness. That's what they were saying. It was a presumption, probably a wrong one, but not what Brookings was saying themselves.
Yes, yes, not what Brookings was saying, but that presumption from far too many people in society that there's got to be something innately wrong with Black people for not pursuing their education. And in fact, maybe no one has pursued education more vigorously than Black folks. I mean, it was illegal to read and write for Black people in this country, and yet Black folks risked their lives sneaking off plantations and teaching each other how to read and write during slavery. During Reconstruction, Black people flooded to the South to set up schools, the first public schools in the South, all across the country. And until this day, you know, from the civil rights freedom schools that were created to support civil rights organizing, to the massive efforts of Black Lives Matter in school today, Black people have relentlessly been pursuing education because we know there is no liberation without education. The problem is the dramatic lack of resources that are hoarded by the wealthiest in our country. I mean, when you look at the levels of inequality, when a handful of people in the richest 1% have as much wealth as the bottom half of humanity on the globe, you can see that that is going to create dramatic inequality, and those resources are systematically denied from Black and brown communities in the United States.
Let me ask Marshe a question here, if I may. There is something referred to in educational reports as fourth grade failure system. It's when Black pupils get to about the age of 9, they find that the system is turning against them, whereas before perhaps they'd been accepted. So from the age of 9 onwards, perhaps they're finding it more difficult. With yourself and your peers, you obviously made it through and graduated, and now you're at university. But with some of the fellow pupils you had at your school, do you recognize that?
From some people that I had at my school, I noticed I had at least 5 people drop out, but that was high school. I can say that the outside community got to them. They felt like school just wasn't it for them. It wasn't going to work out. They weren't getting the help that they needed. And yes, people offer to help. There you have those few teachers who want to try and help you, but sometimes that's just not enough. Sometimes the outside world it's too heavy. Like Jesse said, we have to work 10 times harder. We have to work 10 times harder just to be half as good. And a lot of that pressure, you can't put that on someone who's 10. You can't put that on someone who's 14 years old. That is a hard expectation.
And is that why, sorry to butt in, is that why you think Black boys are 3 times as likely to be suspended? I think that's the figure. US and UK, perhaps Brenda will tell us about that. 3 times as likely to be suspended as white boys.
Yeah, we've seen countless times, especially in the school system, that there are white children who can get into a fight and they'll get their parents called and that's it. And then there's Black children who get into a fight and they have school police up there, LAPD, and they want to pepper spray everybody, put the kid in handcuffs, and really go the extra mile to make this young Black boy seem like a threat, like he's harmful and he's going to hurt everybody, when in reality, you know, it's high school, people fight, that's a part of life. But the standards and the protocols that they go through just for one Black boy versus one white boy, it's a huge difference. You can see where the resources and the money is going towards making this Black man look like a threat and really hurting and harming his mental. And that trickles down into the school to prison pipeline. And that is how our government and our society is funded, through prison workers. And it all starts from school.
Okay, back to you, Jesse, right now, if I may, and then I'll come to you, Brenda. The school to prison pipeline is something that you have mentioned. You're writing a book called Black Lives Matter at School. What is the point you're trying to make with this book, which you started before the George Floyd killing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I agree with Marshe. There is a school to prison pipeline. and it's being systematically built from our classrooms into jail cells. It's really appalling. I teach at a high school just a few blocks away from where they've opened a brand new youth jail. They spent $200 million on this place to cage children, but they can't spend that money to lower our class size. They can't spend that money to fund restorative justice counselors. In the United States, 1.6 million children go to a school where there's a police officer, but there is no counselor. And that's how the school to prison pipeline functions. It's about criminalizing and punishing our youth rather than nurturing and supporting youth who may have faced different traumas and need those supports. And I think our priorities are upside down, and that's what this movement is really all about. It's about uprooting institutional racism in our schools and replacing it with restorative justice programs that ask the student, how have you been harmed? How have you harmed others? And how can we work to make you whole? Because we know that hurt people, right? And so we want whole people so they can help heal people.
Let me quote Marian Wright Edelman, American activist for children's rights, writing in 1989. Education remains one of the Black community's most enduring values. It is sustained by the belief that freedom and education go hand in hand, that learning and training are essential to economic equality and independence. Brenda, fine words, great sentiment. Do you find that that is recognized by the authorities in the United Kingdom in terms of the amount of money they spend on Black pupils, or is there the kind of segregation and ghettoization that Jessie spoke of?
Yes, I agree. There is the segregation that Jessie spoke of, and I think the inequalities really have shone through with the COVID lockdown that we've had in the UK. So where you have close to 80% of students who attend private schools having access to online education, and then this drops to just over 40% for children in state schools, on which Black students are overrepresented. And as Jeffrey said, among the Black community, education.
Sorry, are you talking simply about the difference between private schools and what we would call state schools in the United Kingdom, or
So
are you talking about the difference between Black pupils and white pupils?
Well, within state schools in certain parts of London, in urban areas, as Jesse said, when you go to some of these state schools in certain areas, postcode areas, those classes are largely made up of Black students. So they tend to be in schools, some of these schools in the most deprived areas. So those students won't have access to online classes, one, because they're unlikely to have laptops, and in some cases, they'll be unlikely to have access to internet. So
and is the UK government taking any notice of this?
No, they are not taking much notice of this, because there has been a campaign asking for the provision of laptops and the ability to have access to internet for those students from those areas, and nothing has been done.
I want to go to Marshe for a final word on this, because you are a young person in a system that you say is loaded against people such as yourself and others from similar backgrounds. Do you see anything changing?
I see people rising up. I see people fighting for a change. I've been organizing for about 4 years now. And when I first got into this work, we had random searches where I was being pulled outside of my classroom. My stuff was being thrown out of my bag. I was being accused of sniffing hand sanitizer to get high by security guards. And now we don't have random searches anymore. We wanted into that campaign. So that has changed. And now we're pushing to defund school police, because they get about $70 million worth of our budget to be funded, versus getting those things that we talked about earlier, getting counselors, therapists, smaller class sizes, more Black
Yeah.
teachers, more ethnic studies to learn more about our culture and not just the slave part, because Black people were not slaves. They were kings and queens who got turned into slaves. So there's a change happening. There's small victories happening, but change isn't here yet. But with all the countries, I believe 7 countries are marching and rallying with us right now. We have people who are in high ranking supporting us. We have celebrities out here. If we can keep that up, if we can keep that going, we can have anything that we desire in the educational system, because I believe that people are power. We are power. We have the power to change this. Change is coming. There have been small changes, but it isn't done yet.
And you are a sociology student, so maybe you'll use your degree to effect that change in years to come. Listen, thank you, Marshe, thank you, Jesse, thank you, Brenda, thank you very much indeed. There is a lesson to be learnt in what our three guests had to say today, and in the facts and the figures. From me, David Foster, from all of us here on Roundtable, we thank you for your company. We hope you will join us again next time. But for now, goodbye.